What's up everybody, this is Master EN Gamer. The Overwatch universe is riddled with violent and villainous factions, from Los Muertos trafficking weapons through the streets of Dorado, to the shadowy Talon organization who puppeteers chaos on a global level. There is no shortage of adversaries facing those who seek to bring peace and justice to the world. But as we draw closer to the release of Overwatch 2, perhaps the most destructive and omnipresent threat in our sights is the robotic menace known as Null Sector. These enemies seemingly seek to achieve world domination at the cost of human extermination, and thus are likely to be the greatest threat facing the newly reformed Overwatch. But these anti-human machines weren't always hellbent on ruling the world. In fact, their origin is almost sympathetic, and only over time did they begin to spiral out of control into the global crisis we see unfolding in Overwatch's sequel. So in today's video, I'll be covering the complete history of Null Sector, ranging from their first uprising in London to the world war they're waging in Overwatch 2. Before we get into it though, I'd like to real quickly remind you to like, subscribe, and hit up that bell icon if you enjoy this video, as that does a ton to help out my channel and makes sure you never miss a future video. But now, let's take a look at how Null Sector came to be the greatest threat facing modern day Overwatch. The earliest known presence of Null Sector in the Overwatch timeline is roughly 7 years prior to the events of Overwatch 1. This radical Omnic organization formed in response to the brutal treatment of their kind in the United Kingdom following the global conflict known as the Omnic Crisis. With large swaths of England having been destroyed in the war, much of the nation's reconstruction fell on the backs of Omnic laborers. Forced to perform grueling and hazardous work, these automatons often got stuck doing the jobs humans avoided. And what's worse is that despite everything they contributed to the reconstruction effort, Omnics were denied the same basic rights and citizenship held by their human counterparts. They were forced to undergo registration and transit checkpoint scans just to live out their daily lives in the city. This difference in social status led to much anti-Omnic sentiment amongst the UK's human population, and naturally, tensions began to rise between the two groups. Needless to say, many Omnics in the UK grew sick of being treated like second-class citizens. After so many years of oppression and mistreatment, they were now willing to seize equality no matter the cost, and thus a revolution was born. It's unclear whether this uprising was the true inception of Null Sector, or if the group already existed at this point and merely seized the opportunity to make themselves known, but either way, this was their first big step in waging war against humanity. What started as a series of underground conflicts across London quickly escalated into taking control of the city, and soon enough, the entire world became aware of their anti-human conquest. At this point, Null Sector's forces were comprised of not only agitated Omnic citizens, but also military units capable of mass destruction. Among the weaponized Null troopers and eradicators marched specialized units like the Slicer and Detonator, in addition to retrofitted war machines like the B-73 Bastion unit and OR-14s. These older machines had made up large swaths of the Omnic forces during the Omnic Crisis, and thus were a terrifying sight to see returning to the streets of London. After nearly a month of Null Sector's conquest, the UK was drawing dangerously close to all-out war, with the rest of the world possibly not being very far behind. The Omnic terrorists had captured London's mayor, along with the Shambali leader Mandata and 100 others, and held them hostage in the King's Row power plant. However, it was at this point that Overwatch got involved and began to turn the tide of the conflict. Despite clear orders from the UK government not to intervene, Overwatch Strike Commander Morrison ordered Tracer, Reinhardt, Mercy, and Torbjorn to infiltrate King's Row and rescue the hostages. After fighting their way through the streets and breaching the doors of the power plant, the 4 Overwatch agents were able to save the hostages just in time before Null Sector could blow up the facility. Following this rescue, little is known about how the King's Row uprising concluded. We know that ultimately the forces of Null Sector are defeated, likely due to further intervention by Overwatch, but the exact details of how long this took or what happened to the remainder of Null Sector's forces are a mystery. However, what is known is that by the time the conflict was over, Null Sector had made their mark. Hundreds of people had lost their lives, and once again, the city of London had been devastated by Omnic forces. Despite this having been Null Sector's first big act of aggression, it echoed across the globe and would ultimately prepare them for the world stage later down the line. Following the King's Row uprising, Null Sector largely went dark for the next several years. We don't know whether they were involved in other anti-human conflicts during this time, or if they were just completely out of the picture during that period, but either way, one thing we do know is that they weren't entirely wiped out in King's Row. There are two more official mentions of Null Sector in the Overwatch canon prior to the events of Overwatch 2. One of these is a newspaper on Havana, where we can see a Spanish headline that appears to read, "Who is Null Sector?" thus indicating that Null Sector in some form or another may still be on the minds of many people in the present day. The second mention was at the very end of Tracer's London Calling comic series. After the Omnic revolutionary Case makes his escape, Tracer and Winston try to track him down and investigate his connections. According to Winston, it's possible that Case has ties to Null Sector, but unfortunately doesn't give any further insight on the matter. He doesn't specify whether Null Sector is known to still be a threat at this point, or if Case's presence in King's Row is just merely reminiscent of the Null Sector uprising there 7 years prior. But either way, these are the last official mentions of Null Sector prior to their grand reintroduction in Overwatch's sequel. However, before we move on to Overwatch 2, there is one other event in the Overwatch 1 timeline which seemingly features the presence of Null Sector. At the very end of Storm Rising, which chronologically takes place only a year after the King's Row uprising, Doomfist is seen speaking with an unidentified Omnic in Egypt.
My friend, the world doesn't understand visionaries like us. I respect what you are trying to accomplish. You fight for your kind. It's noble and doomed to fail. But with Talon's help, that can change.
You have my attention.
While it hasn't been officially confirmed, it's reasonable to assume that the Omnic we see here is in some way affiliated with Null Sector. Not only is his appearance reminiscent of the uprising Null Sector forces when it comes to his visual design and color scheme, but also the conversation he has with Doomfist strongly alludes to him being part of the Omnic extremist group. Doomfist acknowledges that the Mystery Omnic fights for his kind, which is what Null Sector did when revolting in King's Row. Their uprising was in response to Omnic oppression at the hands of humans, but just as Doomfist says in this cutscene, it was doomed to fail. Aside from this scene though, we don't see or hear of Null Sector again until Overwatch 2. Looking at Null Sector's presence during the upcoming events of Overwatch 2, this is where we see them really start to take center stage as an adversary of Overwatch. Their return to the spotlight began in Paris, where they faced off against the local law enforcement and a small team of newly reformed Overwatch agents in the Zero Hour animated short. In this attack, we saw that the forces of Null Sector had taken on a new visual design and now boasted a more aggressive appearance and white color scheme as opposed to the predominantly purple one we saw previously. On top of that, their ranks enlisted new, colossal Omnic types never before seen at their disposal. Like the Bastion and OR-14 units back in King's Row, these too bore a resemblance to some of the robot monstrosities deployed during the Omnic Crisis. And while this Titan would prove to be only the tip of the iceberg when it came to the new weapons in Null Sector's arsenal, its presence in Paris catches Overwatch off guard, and the robot is only stopped by the equally unexpected appearance of Genji, Reinhardt, and other former Overwatch members. Together, the agents are capable of defeating the colossal Omnic, and in doing so, seemingly stave off the Null Sector attack on Paris. But as it turns out, this was only the beginning. Following Paris, Null Sector began waging war across the entire world. The exact sequence of events following 0 Hour don't seem to be entirely set in stone yet, as Overwatch 2 is still in development at the time of me making this video, and thus certain plot points in the story are, according to the devs themselves, subject to change. However, going by just the sequence of events as they've been shown to us thus far, Null Sector's next attack after Paris was in Rio de Janeiro, where we once again saw a small team of Overwatch agents combat the Omnic threat. This mission, which was playable for BlizzCon 2019 attendees, took place predominantly in the streets of Rio, where Tracer, Reinhardt, Mei, and Lucio fought against countless Null Sector robots. As they battled, the 4 agents eventually made their way onto the Null Sector command ship, which hovered over the city. There, they found out that the ship itself was not only overseeing the assault on Rio, but also contained a factory which was actively producing more Null Sector forces as the battle took place. After destroying the ship's power core, the 4 Overwatch agents made their hasty escape before the command ship exploded and presumably crashed down into the water below. During this mission, we were introduced to even more variants of the Null Sector forces, including multiple airborne units, quadrupedal artillery cannons, and perhaps most notably, the colossal Behemoth Omnic, which served as the mission's final boss. All of these represented the immense amount of progress which had been made by Null Sector since King's Row, not only in terms of the technological advancements of their units and weaponry, but also the vast increase in their numbers. At this point, it became clear that Null Sector could very well become the most formidable threat to face the world since the Omnic Crisis. Alongside Rio de Janeiro, the other confirmed location in which Null Sector initiated an attack during the events of Overwatch 2 was Toronto, Canada. However, here they were seemingly much more successful in their conquest, as according to the Overwatch developers, Null Sector has been actively laying siege to Toronto for an undisclosed length of time by the time Overwatch shows up here. Based on the footage shown during BlizzConline, we can see Null Sector forces actively patrolling the streets and seemingly imposing martial law upon its citizens. One particularly grim detail to take note of in Toronto is that, aside from Sojourn, we don't see any humans left occupying the city. All remaining citizens appear to be Omnics, which, considering the anti-human goals of Null Sector, could be a horrifying indicator of what has befallen the city's human population following Null Sector's arrival. Looking back over the entire history of Null Sector, it's quite remarkable to see how far they've managed to come and in such a short amount of time. Over the course of just 7 years, they went from a single violent uprising in London to all-out war on a global scale. While the accolades of the Omnics themselves shouldn't be underappreciated, it's clear that Null Sector wasn't capable of achieving such power on its own. Jumping back to the conversation Doomfist had with the mystery Omnic at the end of Storm Rising, Null Sector's spontaneous rise to power only seems to lend further credence towards this unnamed character being a member, if not the de facto leader, of the entire Omnic extremist group. Null Sector's sudden rise to power makes a lot more sense when you consider that Talon is likely the ones funding their endeavors. In fact, focusing specifically on this one mysterious character, there are a number of interesting deductions to be made about him, especially when factoring in a number of meta comments and details revealed by the Overwatch devs themselves. However, I wouldn't be able to do him justice by just tacking that discussion onto this video, which is why I'll be saving it for his own Hero Watch video that I plan to release in the near future. Once that video is finished and uploaded, I'll have a link to it in both the cards on screen and this video's description, so be sure to check it out. But otherwise, that's the complete history of Null Sector so far. Undoubtedly, we'll be learning much more about them as we inch ever closer towards Overwatch 2, but in the meantime, be sure to subscribe, hit up that bell icon, follow me on Twitter, and come join my Discord server to hang out and never miss any of my future Overwatch news and content. Special thanks to my YouTube channel members who help make these videos possible, and if you'd like to join them to earn some cool rewards like getting your name at the end of my videos, then just hit that join button down below. This is Master EN Gamer signing off, and until next time, have a great day.